So welcome everybody at my talk about the importance of readability for SEO. I believe my husband told a little bit about that already. So let's get started. So this is how most people know us. They know us from their WordPress backends. They're trying to get those bullets green and optimize their text for a certain key phrase. In this case, guinea pig. You can optimize the text for guinea pig. So apart from this SEO analysis, which we all know, and which we help people optimize their texts for the search engines, we also have a readability analysis, which looks like this. So we've launched this readability analysis about 4 years ago. And this analysis helps customers to write a text that is nice and easy to read. And it gives feedback on just how to improve your text. So my talk today is about our analysis, but mostly about readability in general. I'm going to talk about why readability is important for the user and why it is important for SEO, because I believe it is. And what the consequences of readability being important for SEO are. And then I'll give some tips on how to improve the readability of your blog posts. But first, let's look at some feedback we got from customers on our readability analysis. So someone says, the readability analysis of Yoast SEO helps me to find out improvement points to increase the level of readability. I've been benefited a lot by using this feature. I recommend it highly to the newbie who is in blogging career. Thanks, Team Yoast. Yeah, that's lovely. That makes my day. Unfortunately, other people sometimes seem to be a bit annoyed with our readability analysis. They say, readability depends on your audience a lot. This person says, I run a Linux news blog and a lot of the topics are complex by nature and hard to make for easy reading. But my audience is up to it. So I seldom get a green light, but my readers agree that my writing is not too hard to understand given the complexity of the matter. Other people say, Yoast readability analysis really hits my default style. I'm just too bloody wordy. And then someone else says, in my experience, the only thing it would like is the hungry caterpillar. And we do like the hungry caterpillar. But it appears that some of our customers don't like our readability analysis. So why do we have it? Of course, you can't please everyone. And I think it's totally fine if someone doesn't want to use a feature of our plugin. However, we built this analysis for very good reasons. And that's why in this talk, I'm going to tell you why readability is important and why we built our analysis in that way. And it's both important for the reader as well as for Google. So after I convinced you all of the importance of readability, I'll give some practical tips on how to improve that. And I get that people are frustrated by our analysis. I get this. I get that people say, thank God Dickens was not born in the era of Yoast plugin. He would have died at the hand of low readability. But guess what? Our readability analysis is designed for online texts, for texts people read from screens. Hemingway, Shakespeare, Dickens, they were artists, literary artists, and they weren't looking to sell pens online or to maintain a mom blog or do anything like that. So most online authors, most bloggers aren't trying to write the great American novel, and they shouldn't be. They want to sell something, want to inform people of something, and all do that in an online environment. So the goal of our readability analysis is not to discredit Dickens, and I really like his novels. The goal and what the plugin measures is to help people understand the text, which is designed for online tools. So there are 4 reasons why readability for online texts are important. And the first one is that reading from a screen is hard. Reading from a screen is much harder than reading from a book or a magazine or a newspaper. And that's why different readability rules apply. For a lot of people, it's more difficult to read from a screen than from a book because you can't like grab it. And that's the case for desktop. But for mobile, it becomes even more difficult. A long sentence on mobile will run through a number of lines. And just the fact that your eyes need to go over a number of lines, that'll make understanding it more difficult. And it becomes even more difficult when there's a lot of distraction on your screen, which is the case on most websites. So there's a lot going on, which means that you need a text that's nice and easy to read. There's another reason why readability is important. People are quickly bored. Your text needs to appeal instantly because you only have a few seconds to really appeal to your audience. That means you should write your text in such a way that it will help people to grasp what your text is about in a matter of seconds. Because before deciding to want to read something, people will scan through a text. They want to know what your text is about. And people seem to be really alike in the way they scan through texts. If people scan through a text quickly in a number of seconds, they tend to read headings and subheadings and the first sentences of paragraphs. So these should be extra good. So the second reason why readability is so very important to the user is because people are quickly bored and you need to grasp their attention in a number of seconds. The third reason why readability is important is the most important one, because when you're writing a text, you want people to understand what you're writing about, because otherwise you shouldn't be writing a text. You want your message to be understood. You want people to understand what you're telling them. Maybe you want to convince them to buy your product. Maybe you want to excite them about something. Nobody likes to read something that's incomprehensible, boring, or stuffed with keywords. People will stop reading that. And if people stop reading, then your message will not come across. So the most important reason why readability is important is because people otherwise don't understand your text. So let's look at some feedback. So far, I'm finding your WordPress plugin really helpful. So thank you. Hard for you. However, my blog posts are written for grown-ups and I write at a college level. Sorry, but I don't know how to dumb myself down. Does this hurt my SEO? Thanks. This is a really nice comment, and it actually resembles the comment we got from the person with a Linux blog, right? And Linux news blog. So do you need to dumb yourself down? Do you need to dumb down your writing style in order to comply with our readability checks? And although I get this frustration, I really don't agree. In fact, my PhD even passes our readability test. And I have to be a little bit honest with you, because in the field of research I did my PhD in, it wasn't particularly common to add white spaces and subheadings in the text. It wasn't written for online, although some of it is online. So I have to add subheadings and white spaces in my text, but then my PhD complies with the readability analysis of Yoast SEO. So sentence length, flesh-eating reads, passive voice, I all mastered that. And I do think that my topic was rather advanced. So I do think that you can write a text which is at the high end and still have a readable text. You have to understand that we did not come up with this analysis out of nowhere. We did not make this stuff up. We did extensive research, and we now have a whole team of linguists who are working on these kinds of stuff. You know, especially sentence length is one I really enjoy because, well, it's very tangible. A text that consists of many long sentences is really hard to read. And that's just because long sentences are more difficult to process in our brain. So most people lose track of the meaning of a sentence when it's very long. It's just a matter of brain capacity. And then if one long sentence is followed by another long sentence, the reader might fail to understand the meaning of a text completely. But the boundary of when a sentence is too long depends on the country or the language, sorry. So for English, it turns out it's a little bit different than for Italian. And it all has to do with the grammatical structure of a language, not with the brain capacities of Italian and English people. I don't know about that. We didn't do any research about that. But we've made our boundaries based on what we know from linguistic research. Because what's right for English might not be right for Italian, Polish, or Russian. But all these things are based on what we know that human brains can process. And Google, of course, knows these things as well. So I think, and I'm going to get ahead and give a little tip now. If you write for a really advanced audience and use a lot of difficult words, because that's very common. Because when I was doing my PhD in criminology, I was usually using a lot of difficult words as well, because that was common. These words were the words that all my colleagues were using. You should use those words. Perhaps that's even the words that people are searching for. But you could make your sentences a bit shorter, or at least make sure that there are enough short sentences in your text that will give a lot of brain space for people and make them get them up to the task to get through those difficult sentences. So it's important to have a readable text, because that way people will understand your message. And then we have a fourth reason on why readability is so very important, and that has to do with voice search. So I'm now really a Google expert, and I don't know if voice search is going to become big. I don't really believe it will, but for the sake of the argument, if voice search is getting important, then readability will get important as well. If people start searching for information with voice search and end up listening to a relatively long piece of information, imagine yourself listening to a long paragraph with really long sentences containing lots of difficult words read to you out loud. That will be completely impossible to understand, and Google wouldn't want to use an answer like that. And just as a side point, this is the thing that visually impaired people have to go through if they read a text with a screen reader, if a screen reader reads the text to them. If a text isn't well structured, or if a text is really difficult, that is so difficult to process only by listening to it, because the only thing you have are your ears, and you can't scan with your ears. So the fourth reason why readability could be important is because of voice search. Well, up until now, we mainly talked about the importance of readability for the user. And of course, if your text or if your website is better for the user, it will rank better, because Google optimizes for those same users. But let's focus on Google a little bit more, and let's look at the importance of readability for SEO directly. So, although your audience may be able to understand a specific lingo, maybe up to the task, if you want to rank high, you should be able to reach a large audience. Of course, you can have a very specific niche, like the Linux news blog. And if you focus on very long tail terms, and you have a very specific audience, you might get away with that. But isn't the entire idea of SEO to reach an audience beyond your special niche, to get more people to your website? If you want to rank high in the search engines, you want to attract people that are not necessarily the same people as the people already in your audience. And let's say you have this very specific niche, and Google is able to choose from your blog posts and the blog posts of a competitor that are easier to read, what will Google choose? It's very important to realize here that Google reads texts too. Overall, the algorithm of Google is trying to mimic a human. It tries to read texts like a human being. And Google is becoming more and more capable of understanding and scanning text in a human-like way. And that means that the demands of readability of a text also rise. And Google will have a hard time, or at least a harder time, to analyze weird long sentences, let alone grammatically incorrect sentences. We've known for a while that Google reads texts, and we know that Google is getting better and better in parsing text and matching keywords and search queries with results. So the Hummingbird update, and even before that, the Panda update, those were clear indications that Google is getting better and better in understanding texts. And with the recent Bird update, this even became more clear. So what does this mean? Google understands texts better. If a text is complicated, it will be harder for Google to understand. And that means readability will become more important for ranking. So if we assume that Google reads texts, we need to face some facts or some consequences as SEOs. It's good fun to add keywords in a text, but that should never compromise readability, or it will be bad for your rankings. So optimizing for the search engine should never compromise your readability. And now I hear you all thinking, I can't see you, but I still can hear you thinking, what about those bullets then, Marieke? You have invented focusing on keywords. You have a focus key phrase thing in your plugin. So what are you thinking? Well, let's get this straight. I really believe in keywords, or at least I strongly believe in doing keyword research. You should find out what your audience is searching for, and you should use those exact words because your audience is using them. But I think that's just basic marketing. The exact matching of keywords, especially if they are a little bit longer, becomes less and less important. And trying to optimize your text for a very specific key phrase, that feels a bit outdated. So that's why our plugin recognizes different word forms and synonyms. So it's able to recognize plurals, past tense, a different word order, and you can add related keywords too. So in our premium analysis, we're able to analyze your text for SEO and take into account all these different word forms. An example. In this example, our analysis recognizes both the singular guinea pig as well as the plural guinea pigs. And that makes it a lot easier to optimize for the search engines without compromising your readability. In our free analysis, you had to choose either one. In this way, you'll be optimizing in a natural way. You have focus, which is good, but it should not be a game. And as you perhaps can imagine, this is a very language specific, because how plurals work in English is very different for Italian, for example. So that's why we have an entire team of linguists working on it. So now this functionality exists in English, German, Dutch, we've added Spanish, French, and this week we've added Russian. I'm really excited about that. We're working on Italian, I believe Portuguese, and Indonesian, but that could take a while because that's rather difficult. But we're making big steps to get this done in multiple languages. So I promised to get back with some tips on how to improve your readability. And the first one is a tip, and it's not in our readability analysis because, well, I haven't figured out a way on how to check this, but I think it's the most important thing. I think the structure of your text and your paragraphs is really important, because if the structure, the line of argumentation you have in your text is clear, that will make your readers to understand the text much better. So I always try to convince people to start off by thinking, what do I want to say in this blog post? What is my message? And then think about what kind of paragraphs belong with that and what the line of argumentation is going to be. make sure to write clear paragraph. Lots of people use white spaces whenever it feels right, and they don't really think about their paragraphs. And I think that's a mistake, because you know, that first sentence of a paragraph, that's what your readers will read when they're scanning through a text. So if you start a paragraph, and you'll see that in most newspapers, writers are used to doing it just that way, you'll start with the most important sentence. And in this case, yeah, I'm a big fan of guinea pigs. You've noticed that. Guinea pigs are social companion animals that require daily interaction. That's the main message of this paragraph. And the other sentences, they'll just elaborate a bit. So the first sentence is the most important one in most of my blog posts, and I often do it wrong as well. And make sure that your paragraphs aren't too long, because people are not well in doing with long paragraphs. We've already talked about this, right? Try to write shorter sentences. Those are much easier to read and understand, especially if your lingo is a bit hard. And also, you're likely to make fewer grammatical errors as your sentences are nice and short. So in English, we consider sentences containing more than 20 words to be too long. That does not mean that you can't write any sentences longer than 20 words, but that you should try to write less than 30% of long sentences in your entire text. So if you're writing, make sure that you only have a few sentences of longer than 20 words in a blog post, and then use some short sentences to mix it up. That will make your text more fun to read. It will make it a nice read. And then the third one is to add transition words. You can make your writing so much more readable if you use the proper transition words. It's like putting cement between your sentences. The relationship between two sentences becomes much more clear if you use transition words. I will give you some examples. Like if you use words like most important, then the reader will know that something important comes up. That's just like a clear signal, something important is coming up. If you're summarizing and you use first of all or second, then people will know, oh, this is the first thing and the second thing. If you're saying, if you want to conclude, you'll use concluding, and then people will know, now the conclusion is coming up. These words, we teach our children these words in school. My son comes home with, oh, I've learned these words, and these words help me to understand the text. And so as writers, we should use them to help our audience to understand our texts. So what should you remember from this talk? Well, you only have to remember 3 things, so that's easy. You have to remember that readability is important for your users. This isn't a sentence. Readability is important for your all users. Yeah, for all your users. Yeah, you see my point. Readability is important for Google. So both for the user as well for Google. And I think writing a readable text, although it can be hard, it's certainly not impossible. So this was my talk. And if you have any questions, then you can leave them in the Q&A and Taco will ask me, right?
Absolutely, I will. Thank you so much for your presentation, Marieke. I already have a couple of questions lined up. Let's start with Bianca Abma's question. She says, in blog posts, I have no problem with using enough transition words. I learned using them more thanks to you guys. But in product pages, I managed to only get about 15 to 20%. Will this affect the UX negatively?
Well, first of all, congratulations on getting the transition word bullet green. That's the one I have most trouble with. So I really admire you. Product pages are a bit different. I don't know if your UX will be affected badly, because if it feels like you have to gamify transition words, and you're probably trying too hard, and then it's never the right way. I think you have a good point, and we should look into the readability of product pages a little bit more, because our checks are really based on well, texts that are a little bit longer. Product pages are usually a bit shorter. So we should look into that. So I think if you have about 20%, you're good to go. I want to use this opportunity, because I'm talking now, to say that so it's okay if you don't have all bullets green in your readability analysis. If your overall bullet is green, then you're good to go. So don't try to get them all green. That's not necessary. The idea is that you have like the overall thing has to be green. I never have them all green, or hardly ever. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a clear answer. And it relates to the next question, where Paul Sherland asks, most of my blog posts are anchored by a YouTube or Vimeo video placed below the first paragraph. I expect that most site visitors engage with the videos and don't read the edited transcripts that form the text of the posts. How is readability analysis changed by the presence of those videos?
Well, the readability analysis won't do anything with your video. It will look at the transcript. And I totally get that it's hard to get a green bullet in a transcripted piece of text, because it's read out loud and different rules apply there. That's a hard one. I think it's a good thing that you have those transcripts, because that allows Google to to get what your video is about. Because if you don't have any transcript, Google will only see the video, and it's better with text. I think it's a hard one. I wouldn't know. I think we do the same thing on our blogs, so we also have the transcript. If you only have those kinds of blog posts and no other ones, I could imagine that you could benefit from having some subheadings between that, because it will be hard to grasp and to read through it if people were wanting to read through it. You could maybe have like a free transcript, not the exact matching transcript, and have a little bit more editing in there. So that could be cases. It's a hard question, Taco. We talked about this. You could only give me the easy ones. This is a joke.
All right. I think I have an easier one for you. I'll roughly translate. Mustafa asked, is readability important in Persian? And we can extrapolate that. Is readability important in all languages?
It is. It is. However, no, it is. So that's the first thing, because it's important to the user. And that makes it important to Google as well. So in every language, readability is important. In every language, different boundaries apply, and we're not good in Persian yet. So sorry. But I think what goes for us, so we're not good in every language yet, is the same, that goes the same with Google. So Google is really good in English. And if we look how capable Google is in understanding Dutch, we see that it is far less capable in understanding Dutch than it is in English, but it's getting better. So I think, and Persian is a much bigger language than Dutch is, of course, but it will be hard for Google. I don't know, but I think, so in every language, it's important. For some languages, Google is better in understanding that language than for other ones. But in the end, Google will understand all languages, I think.
All right, there's a lot of questions lined up, but we only have time for a final one. And I think it's a very important question by Mark Smallman. He asks, would you consider readability to be closely aligned with accessibility? And if so, how much does Google measure accessibility?
Yeah, yes, I do think it's closely related to accessibility. And that's because it just helps people, all people, to understand the text. And then for people who have like a visual impairment, it will be even more important, because they have fewer anchor points than people who don't have that visual impairment. So I think it really is closely related to accessibility. I don't know in what way Google thinks accessibility is important. I hope they think it's important, but that's not, I don't know. I don't know for sure. They should think it's important. So, and if I should predict something, I think it will be more important in the future. Usually the things you do for SEO are also things you should do for accessibility. Those things often go hand in hand because Google wants to have a lot of information on how things are on your site, and for a lot of accessibility things you want to have explicit information as well. So I believe that if you make a website accessible, it will also be really good for your SEO.
Thank you very much, Marieke.